In this presentation, we will take a look at the Reports Center within QuickBooks Pro 2019. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are on the home page. We also have the Open Windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the View dropdown and selecting Open Windows List. If you want to just start entering data and start a new company file, you can jump forward to the area that starts with a 6. We are now going to move to looking at the reports and navigating the different reports being the end result, what will be created as we enter the normal transactions. In other words, as we look at these icons that we've been going through, QuickBooks will use those in order to generate the reports. It's useful for us to think about every time we enter information, how it's going to affect different reports and how we want it to affect different reports. And that'll better allow us to think about how we want to set up these items, which we'll talk about when we set up the new company files and set up these items and think about the things that drive these items. To get to the different reports, we can go to the Reports dropdown. And as we've done with some prior presentations, we could go to the Company and Financials and the other types of reports settings here. There's a lot of reports. And go through the reports in this way. We've been going to the companies and financials, taking a look at the profit and loss and the balance sheet. These are two things that QuickBooks sees as reports and are grouped under the reports, as we can see here. And they're also things that I would think of as financial statements. So note that QuickBooks will use some terms that is going to line up with financial accounting sometimes, and sometimes use terms which we might think are just solely for QuickBooks. In other words, accounting itself has its own language. QuickBooks has its own language, which sometimes lines up to normal accounting, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes QuickBooks is going to name things a little bit differently, and we just got to note whenever we're talking to somebody, what's the language they are talking about, and therefore find what we need when communicating with different people. So reports to QuickBooks includes the financial statements, and it includes any other kind of supporting documentation that is going to be generated typically from the normal financial transactions driven by these icons we've taken a look at in the home page. So if we're starting a company that's already in place, like if we go to work for somebody, then of course their company file's already set up. Our job may just be to print reports, organize reports for data that's inputted somewhere else. And so we need to know what the end result is going to be. If we enter the data into the system, we want to know what's going to happen. Why are we entering this data into the system? We're doing it so that the system can generate reports, such as financial statements. The other place we can go to find reports is going to go to the Reports dropdown and the Reports Center. And this will organize all these reports a little bit easier for us in some ways. It'll give us more of a different organization feel than just having these dropdowns. So we'll go to the Reports Center, and we'll see a similar type of organization within the Report Center. Normally within the Report Center, we're going to be on the Standard tab, but note there's going to be these other tabs up top, and if you go into the Report Center and you're on one of these other tabs, be aware that you're probably going to go back to the Standard tab. If this isn't fully maximized, I'm going to select this little icon, which will maximize it within the screen here, so now it's going to be maximized. We're currently on the Standard tab, and within the Standard tab, we'll have a similar listing that we would see in the Reports dropdown. So if you select the Reports dropdown, then you've got the similar company, customer, sales. So this item here gives us a nice little list, but if we go to something like this, it's going to give us a little bit more detail. We can view this detail with a little snapshot of what the reports will look like, which can give us an idea, especially when we're looking at reports that we don't generate all the time. And we can change these views up top. If we just want to see a list, that would be easier to scroll down and navigate through if we know the name of the report, then it will look like this. If we want to see it in this format, then we can see this type of format as well, which again gives us a nice demonstration type format of the different reports that we are looking at. I'll go back to the default standard, which is in between the two. And so here we have the default standard. It's going to be grouped. We have company and financial reports. We've got customers and receivables, sales, jobs, vendors, purchases, inventory, employees, banking, and account taxes, budgets, lists. Within each of these sections, we will of course have more information. The main reports we're going to be looking at all the time are going to be what I would call the financial statements, those including the profit and loss or income statement and the balance sheet. Those are going to be in the company and financial. So we've got the profit and loss standard. That's usually what we're going to be going into, is the standard profit and loss. You can see some of these variations with the profit and loss. You can experiment with them. Profit and loss detail, profit and loss year to date. You can go into some of these other profit and loss by job and experiment with these different reports and see how there are variations on the profit and loss. We also have the income and expense reports, which of course those are going to be types of accounts that are on the income statement or profit and loss. Graphs related to profit and loss, we can give the nice visuals. Then we have the balance sheet. So if you want to go to the balance sheet in this format, it's a bit tedious because the balance sheet is way down here within the company and financial. So a list or the drop down is a lot faster to get to the balance sheet, which you're going to use probably all the time. Once again, the standard balance sheet is the most likely the report we're going to be looking at all the time. I would call it the financial statement, the main report. All of these are going to be kind of variations within the balance sheet that we can have. You can look at some of those variations and see how they are variations on the balance sheet. Then we've got some graphs related to the balance sheet. And then we've got cash flow, statement of cash flows, another financial statement type report. One of the major financial statements would be the statement of cash flows. I'm going to scroll back up to the top here using a scroll bar to the right, scrolling back up to the top. Once we select the report, we can run the report. We can get information on the report. We can select it as a favorite report and or learn more about the report. Typically, of course, we will be running the report. Once we do so, if we select that icon, then we'll generate the report and we can change the dates. Our data here is in 01/01/19 to 12/31/19. And typically that's going to be one of the first things we will change most of the time will be the date range. So that's January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. And here is our data for that date range we have so far. So I'm going to close this back out. That's going to be the major reports we'll be looking at. Customers and receivables will of course be in relation to receivables from the customer, our sales that we typically make. Two main reports, accounts receivable aging, account receivable detail, and graphs related to them. We'll get more into this data later, but it's good to just scroll through here and see what kind of reports related to the customers. Oftentimes, these other reports that we are looking at will be supporting documentation for accounts on the main reports, on the financial statements, the balance sheet, and the income statement. So the companies, the customers, and receivables, in other words, a lot of the time will be supporting the financial statement account, the balance sheet account of accounts receivable. And then we've got sales, and this will break out of different types of sales items we have. This is going to be supporting the income statement. So the income statement has sales or revenue, and we could support the sales or revenue, breaking out the sales or revenue by, for example, item, or breaking out the sales or revenue by who we sold to, by customer. So getting some more data about the sales, about that line item on the income statement is what most of these reports we do. Jobs, time, and mileage is going to be another type of report that we can take a look at. Jobs are going to be something that we can set up oftentimes if we have some customization within the company. So we'll have a customer and a customer job. For example, if we had a construction company, we might have customer jobs that we would set up. And again, these customer job reports would be backing up or summarizing some of the accounts that we would have on the financial statements, balance sheet, and income statement. Vendors and payables going to be backing up and supporting the payable account on the financial statements, meaning vendors are people that we pay. So on the financial statement, we'll have accounts payable because we will owe money to vendors. Some of our major vendor payables will be the AP aging, which will support that accounts payable, and the AP detail and some graphs that will be supporting documentation. So you can think of all of these documents basically as branching out from all these reports, as branching out from the major financial statements, the balance sheet, the income statement, or otherwise called the profit and loss. Then we have some purchases. Purchases will be supporting the purchases typically on the balance sheet accounts for inventory, if we're tracking the inventory, or any other type of purchase that we have as well. It's going to be tracking what we purchased from vendors here. Purchased by items, inventory, this would be typically inventory items that we would be purchasing. And then we've got inventory reports, which are going to be summarizing and supporting the documentation on the balance sheet for inventory. So we'll have the inventory reported as one number. Then we could sort that inventory by what the inventory is in some of the supporting documentation in terms of the inventory reports. We've got the employee and payroll reports, and this is going to be supporting the balance sheet and income statement in that the balance sheet is going to have payroll liabilities that we have. It's going to be supporting that, and we're also going to have payroll expenses on the income statement or profit and loss. We're going to have the payroll taxes, which will also be included in the payroll expenses. On the profit and loss, this will give us some more detail. Clearly also more detail that we'll need at the end of the year when we fill out the financial statement documentation, such as the W-2s, the W-3, the 941s, the 940s, and whatnot. Then we've got some banking reports. This will give us some more detail with the banking related items, including deposits and check detail. We can sort these reports in different formats and see some of the supporting documentation for the balance sheet account of the checking or cash accounts. We've got the accounting and taxes, and these are going to be some kind of documents that oftentimes deal with debits and credits. So a lot of the other reports, QuickBooks will format without debits and credit. They're going to be financial statement type reports that are in plus and minus format. And down here, we're going to use those reports that oftentimes accountants use more because they use the debits and credits more. Often a lot cleaner of reports. If we know debits and credits, in other words, these reports can be a lot more efficient. But if we don't know debits and credits, they can be kind of confusing, and therefore you have to decide if we want to use them or not. So we have the trial balance, very useful report because it shows in a list of accounts and all the account balances rather than a balance sheet and an income statement that breaks out the accounts and has a bunch of subcategories in it. So if we understand the debits and credits, this could be really useful a lot of times. And then we have the general ledger report, which is going to show detail, transaction detail by account, journals, journal entry type reports, which will show debits and credits, the audit trail types of reports. So these are all reports you can sort through and look at. They still are going to be supporting documentation, or you might think of the documentation that's kind of used to create the financial statements. In other words, when we think about the making of financial statements, we usually think of them as debits and credits first that we then use to create the financial statements. So these are the creating documents, which are also the supporting documents. If we think about the detail of what made up the financial statements, the balance sheet and the income statement, the debits and credits are kind of like the building blocks, and these are those. And then we have the budgets, and these are going to be reports we'll talk about later, and we can have projections and budgets into the future, and then have some budget reports that will help us to plan for the future. And then other type of lists, which may be included in some other areas as well, such as customer lists may also be in the customers and receivables. Vendors lists may be in the vendors and payable as well. But if we just want to list employees, maybe in the employees. But if we just want a list of the contact information and not so much all the other kind of data for it, then we could go to the lists, might be an easier way to get to that information. Then we have the Memorize Reports tab up top. So if we go to the Memorize Reports, it can be very useful whenever we make a change to a report. If we make a report and then we customize that report in some way, we can then memorize the report and be able to go back to it without having to make the changes all the time. So if I made a balance sheet and I adjusted it and I want to then save it so that I don't have to keep making those adjustments each time, I can go back here. For example, the other example is the income statement. If I had a profit and loss and I adjusted it, for example, calling the title an income statement rather than a profit and loss, if I preferred that for some particular customers, then I could save that change and not have to change the title of the report every time we generate a profit and loss and want to call it an income statement. So the memorized reports can be useful. Favorite reports is going to be an item. So if we have a report that we use all the time and we don't want to go through this big sorting group down here, reports, and then sort it down to all these reports, we can save or have our favorite reports here and then go directly to those favorite reports, which can be useful. Recent reports will give us those reports that we've seen most recently. And obviously, we usually deal with some reports very often, like the balance sheet and the profit and loss. Or if we have some standard or customized reports we use all the time, then this is probably an area that for most days we can work from pretty much all the time, because the reports that are recent are the reports that we typically always use. And then we have the contributed reports, which are going to be some adjusted reports that have been contributed, and they're going to be some more customized reports that you can go through and see if any of them are formatted in such a way that you think is useful. If they are, then you could take a look at those and use them as well. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.